And then we'll dive into the projects a little bit. And at that point, I think we'll encourage people to unmute. All right, so Matt just said we are live on YouTube. Great. Okay, well, this seems like a great time for us to get started. So my name is Quentin Stainhouse. I'm an attorney, been practicing law for the last 12 years, first in legal aid at Greater Boston Legal Services for about 12 years. And I just recently started at Suffolk University Law School's Legal Innovation and Technology Lab. Michelle is part of our team as well. Michelle Bernstein is a longtime volunteer at Code for Boston who's been part of the project that I'm going to tell you about the next 10 or 15 minutes, over the course of the next 10 or 15 minutes, that is. And this is the problem that I've been focused on, something that we call the access to justice gap. I'll just give you a little bit of background, because I'm sure some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, some of you don't. So when we talk about access to justice, this is what we mean. We mean the 85% or so of civil legal needs. So we're talking not about people who are being accused of a crime, but people who need access to the court for some other reason, whether that's because they're facing eviction, because they're trying to get a restraining order against a domestic violence abuser, trying to get a divorce. All of these needs where people are not guaranteed a lawyer. Those are needs where very often it's very hard for someone to navigate the process on their own, but we don't have any guarantee kind of help. This is a survey from the Legal Services Corporation, who did a very detailed survey of what people's needs were, not just the issues that people were able to get into the court for and didn't have a lawyer, but what their needs were. And what they found is only about 14% of those were getting met. So that's the problem we're trying to solve, all those people who want to get to the court but can't. And let's add into that existing problem, the one that I've been spending the last decade and a half working on in a little way, when we add in a pandemic to the mix. So I want to take you back to March and April of this last year and just picture what that might have been for somebody who was trying to get to the court. So let's start by thinking about someone who's a tenant and their basement is flooded. Their landlord hasn't done anything about this. They've been trying to call their landlord, who lives out of state, for the last week or so, and nothing is being done. Finally, they decide to call up the court and see what help they can get. They know the court's closed. They can't go in person. Instead of helping them file a case against their landlord who's not being responsive, the clerk decides to call up the landlord on the phone and try to work things out informally. It might sound really great, but what the person who's trying to get that access to the court hears is, I talked with your landlord, everything's fine. They're going to come in and fix the problem now. Do they know if it's really going to get fixed in the next few weeks or not? Is there going to be a longer wait for them? And they decide just to give up and move out and double up with their elderly parents, maybe. Here's another story that I heard early on in the pandemic. This is a domestic violence survivor who has been locked up with their abusive partner, just lost a job. Things are getting a lot more intense and serious. And this is something that we have seen around the world during the lockdown. The rate of domestic violence really rocketed up, became much more serious. So she's decided to get up the courage to go to the court to get a restraining order. But the doors, of course, are locked. A clerk comes up to the door and she ends up waiting outside for hours before the clerk comes and brings her a stack of paper to fill out. No help for how to do it. And this is the form that she's given to fill out. Just a blank piece of paper that says, tell us your story. Why do you need to get this restraining order? Something that's really challenging for someone to do in a tough situation with the added stress of a pandemic and the weight that they've been having to try to even get access into the court to figure out what they need to do. The MassAccess project, or what we call the doc assembly line, was an approach for us to try to solve this problem. To make these informal solutions by clerks who are all meaning well to be ones that can actually meet the needs of people who are trying to get help in an emergency time. So what we did is we've crowdsourced the problem, but in a very structured and managed and rigorous way. So we've taken the resources of people around the world. We put out a call for action and we got volunteers from all over the world, literally representing 5 different continents, to help us take paper forms, processes that were completely locked up on paper, and to process them and turn them into forms that anybody could fill out on their mobile phone and deliver straight to the court. So here's a little bit deeper dive into how this process works. So what these forms do, anybody can use their phone to fill them out. We have all kinds of helpful guidance along the way, including things like a lookup tool that helps people figure out what court they're supposed to file in. They can add their signature to the form. And then when they've completed that process, right from inside this web app that they can access on their phone or on a computer, they can mail the form directly to the court without having to go in person, without having to talk to a clerk who might divert them in a way that is well-meaning but not helpful for them to solve their problem. As I mentioned, we've had many volunteers. This number is actually a little low. I think we've had people who've touched the project in some way. It's over 200, representing 5 continents. This is a picture of our very first meeting, and this is just the first screen out of 6 that we did over Zoom, representing a really amazing cross-section of people with different kinds of skills and resources. These are some of the institutional partners that we've had along the way, people who've donated time at an organizational level. And since this is a more technical audience and the ask that we're having for you is a pretty technical one, it might be worth diving into what our process has looked like in a really big picture way so far. The way that we're trying to solve this problem of taking a PDF and making it into a beautiful online step-by-step guided process is we take a PDF, whether there's an existing one or we have to create it. We have people who have the skill and ability to use Adobe Acrobat to go in and tag those fields and label them using a standardized nomenclature that we came up with. We built a tool that turns that tagged and labeled PDF into a workable draft interview, is what we call the step-by-step process of filling out the form. And that gets a human review, obviously, and a close attention paid to the way the questions are asked, the order that they're asked in. A coder then takes the feedback from the very first pass, the very first draft, and implements some enhancements. And of course, it's really important for us to get feedback and engagement from experts. And that was a lot of the volunteers that we had that ability to be able to give us expert context and to explain not just what the fields on the form say, but what's the hidden meaning behind those questions? What's the best way to phrase it? What's the real intent? How's the court going to be able to use this form? And that, as you can imagine, is a really iterative process. So it wasn't something that's finished the very first time that it's gone through, but we go through it again and again to refine and improve it. You might be wondering, well, what does this all mean for, let's say in a few months, the pandemic, we're over. I don't think that's realistic, but even in a year, there are everyday access problems that won't go away. And that's one of the really nice things about our project is that we know that there's going to be a long-term benefit from the work that we're doing. And at Suffolk University, it's going to be a long time home for the project to live as well. We found this is a really great pedagogical tool for our law students who can learn a useful skill, which is coding and thinking about how to solve legal problems in a more rigorous and automated way. So we plan to keep hold of this project for indefinitely and integrate it into our coursework and to the lab that I work in, which has students as well as fellows like myself. But let's think about what are some of the other problems we're solving. We're all having a shared access problem right now, right? The courts are generally closed. People are finding it much harder to get access to solve the problems that they need. But there's some people who that's an everyday situation. So people who have childcare needs, people who are working during the hours that the court's open, or that they could get some guidance and help to fill out a form. People who can't afford to pay the fare to get down to a legal aid office, for example, or to a court self-service center to get some help filling out the paperwork. And then, of course, people who are literally homebound. And these are all situations that I've run into in legal aid that were really serious problems for being able to help people that managed to find us and to request our help. I want to show you one of our shorter forms. I'm actually not going to show you the one that's linked here, but let's go ahead and start that. And I think I'm going to need to do a new share. So just bear with me for a moment while I do that. Okay. Just so you can see what we're talking about, what these forms actually look like in real life. So here's one that we built early on, one of the first ones that meets the needs of someone who's trying to get emergency repairs made for their house. The idea here is to walk someone through the problem in a very step-by-step way. We're on our test server, so you're going to see a little bit of debug information that doesn't appear there in real on the live site. One thing that we can do in an interview that works on a computer like this one is we can have links that take people to more information, right? So for example, there's a really great site that's existing, Mass Legal Help, which is edited and up to date with really detailed information for people who want that. I find a lot of people don't want to learn everything about how to solve their legal problem. They want to solve their legal problem. They don't need all of the background. So we try to meet both kinds of needs. I'm going to walk through this relatively quickly just to give you the idea of the back and forth and how the process works. Including linking out information, we can have more contextual help as well. Mistake there. We can do things on a computer as well to help people enter information correctly, right? So one thing that we have is this autocomplete feature that uses Google Maps. And here's the court lookup tool that I described. So this is based on the address that they gave me. I know what courts serve that area, so I can help them choose the right court to file in. And again, we can give really specific and detailed help. So one of the things about our process is that, oh, I just see a chat. I want to, hopefully I'm sharing the right thing. Oh, Overlord. Yeah, that's sometimes that might seem that way, depending on what your experience is like as a tenant. Our process of taking all of the forms that we're working on, which are about 30 or so that the court asked us for at first, and there's some that we're adding into the project on our own, is that every form benefits from the improvements we make to the previous form. So all of the things like the style, Some of the questions literally are shared across different forms. And when we update it in one place, it can update it in all of the forms. And things like the court lookup tool, for example, that's the key feature that we're actually going to look for some help for today. And you'll see the person who's filling this out doesn't need to know anything about the law necessarily. They need to be able to answer basic questions about what happened and what their the dates and information that's just about them, that they are just information that they know. We give the people the chance to see it before they sign it. But again, as I said, I'll show you how that works. They have the ability to sign it right on their phone. So we have a QR code as one option for them to do that. They can text a link. This enables like a really nice feature, which is, let's say that you're an advocate or an attorney who's helping a client that can't come into your office in person. You're able to send them the form when it's done to be able to review and add their signature to it. So I'm going to go ahead and just sign it on the computer so you can all see what that looks like. Obviously, this is a lot easier to do on a smartphone. If you happen to have a mouse that will do that neatly, that's great. But that's one of the reasons why we let people use that QR code to get it on their smartphone as well. And then this is their final form that's all filled out with all the information in the right place. Then with one button, they can send it right to the clerk. They can add whatever instructions that they need. And because this is our test server, it's not going to actually get sent to the court. All right, and now they finish the process. So we make it much simpler. By the way, for forms that aren't part of this process, people do have the ability to e-file, but it is very confusing using a proprietary e-filing system that the court has a contract with. Because there's some of these forms that the court hasn't agreed to let us send in directly yet, we went through the process with some partner legal aid agencies to come up with training videos to help people who don't have attorneys navigate that. And it's 4 videos, like 10 minutes of training that you would need in order to go through. So having that link right there, the button that they can click to send it right to the court, is really critical to the success of our project. So that's what the form looks like. I'm going to change the share again and just jump back into what our project is. So let's zoom in and really see, like, what are some of the problems that we want to get some help solving today. They all mostly center around finding and locating information. And specifically, we're thinking about things like, how do we find the right court and how can we improve the process of someone navigating the court when they get there?
Do we want to take a couple questions in the, or
I
should we wait till the end?
I want to describe just what the project is, and then we can jump into questions. Yeah, for sure. And we can go back to some of the things that we've talked about. So what we're really looking for is helping improve the back end work that's going to improve and benefit all of the forms that we're working on, which solve the real problems that people have. But answering questions like this, like, can I file in this court? Is this the right court for me to use? Because there are rules about which courts you can and can't file in depending on where you live, where the other party lives, and that's what we want to help people with. How do I file? Like, what's the address that I mail my paperwork in? What court is this? So sometimes there's informal names that people in the court system use that can be confusing. So we want to demystify that language and help people figure out all the information they need about the court they're looking at to see, is this the right one? Is this the one the person told me to file in or not? Then we have some projects that aren't related to the court in as direct a way, at least not locating the court. How do people find out what's happening in their case? Who else can they ask for the next step? And a much more specific one we have is resources around domestic violence. So there's a great database of state and city-specific resources that we want to integrate with so that we can give people that information and context. They know right who to call in the right place in their form. And this is kind of a smorgasbord, a menu of different choices that you can have. We have 7 different projects that you can work on. These are some of the kind of skills that we're looking for from people. I think everybody is able to contribute in some way to some of the projects that we have. And we have a range of things like from just adding information to a spreadsheet and after doing a Google search to look up the right information, to things that require more Python and advanced HTML coding skills if that's something you have time and capacity for. So I am going to take Michelle's point now and start by opening up questions about that people have here. So, okay.
Yeah, and if folks want, what I can do is if you click I think you can ask to be unmuted, I can let you ask your question directly if you would like to do that. Otherwise, if you want to just have it taken from the chat, just you can put a note in the chat saying you can just take it from there. Up to you.
So Maya, I see you had a question. If you wanted to unmute and ask it, or if you want me to repeat it, either one's okay.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for doing this whole presentation. It's really interesting. I've heard a little bit about it from Michelle as it's gone on, and it's cool to see it all in one place. I was just curious as to how you guys keep the information secure, and then also if the tool is available in multiple languages.
So we have some of our, sorry for the noise in the background. It's part of living in the pandemic too. So as far as security goes, all of our websites are behind HTTPS, and we're hosting on AWS. The software runs in a Docker container, so there's a little bit of an additional layer of security through that. And we're following just best practices. But one thing to keep in mind is that almost all the information that we're handling becomes a public record. So it ends up getting sent to the court and it becomes available in the court. There is an exception with the domestic violence information. And we try to provide tools for people to manage their own data and to, they can create accounts and then delete the information as soon as they don't want it. And we don't provide access to anybody other than to the server itself has a limited set of people who have the ability to access to it. And we have agreements with the court to protect it and to limit that access as well. As far as language access goes, we were very optimistic early on that the court would be able to provide some help with translation. That hasn't proven to be the best partnership. And I think we're looking in terms of language access capability. So we're really interested in other ways to do that, whether that's crowdsourcing or grant funding that will help us bridge that gap. But it's designed from the beginning to be translatable. And we have one form that's live in English and Spanish right now. So Nathan, do you want to ask your question out loud too? I think it will help the people who are streaming, but otherwise I'm happy to repeat it.
It looks like I'm able to unmute. Yeah, I was curious about on the end of the court, which is really cool that they're willing to work on this. So when they get the forms through your sort of e-form, how is that integrated with forms they receive other ways, like paper or like their own e-filing, and kind of what work on their end did they have to do to make this possible?
We went for the easiest and fastest to implement manner, and we're definitely experiencing some of the growing pains from that. So ideally, eventually we'll be directly integrated with their docketing system and their e-filing system and not require people to make accounts to access that. But for now, what's happening is that they get sent as PDFs by email to an address that's specific for each court. And of course, we're making sure that there's TLS enabled on both ends. So that's a secure way to deliver them. It's not ideal for the clerks. Obviously, they don't like having to open an email and then print it and file it either electronically or put a copy in the paper file. But that is what we have right now. And of course, it should hopefully be much better than the other less safe options that they would have. Okay.
I actually have a question, since seems like the floor is pretty clear. I'm just curious, how have the courts, how much have the courts sort of had to change to handle a lot of this versus how much have you had to maybe change some of your approaches to work with the courts, and are the courts starting to make more changes as a result of this work as well?
So other projects that I've done like this in the past, we didn't have any integration with the court. So what that meant was like we would tell the person how to print it, how to get to the court to deliver it in person, or maybe mail it if they had time to mail it. So we've had like really successful projects despite, as you can imagine, some people drop off at that point when they have to get it to the court. So that was what we had as kind of the baseline. It's been really great to have the court agree to take these pleadings by email for now. I suspect it's not going to be a long-term solution for them if the volume were up back to normal. Like, for example, in a few weeks, there's an eviction moratorium in Massachusetts that's going to end. And I think that's going to increase the volume of pleadings substantially. They don't want to get 15,000 eviction cases to be filed by email. So we're looking into other options. The court has done, I think, a really amazing job being adaptive to the circumstances now. And I think we will run into a limit eventually, but the project will still be successful even if we're not able to help people with the emailing. We might have to just give really good instructions to use the e-filing system, which unfortunately is going to be a drop-off point, but it might be the best that we're able to do at some point.
Cool.
We have another question from Nathan.
Hey.
Yeah, go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, I was curious. So if somebody's filling one of these forms out and they have questions, whether legal or maybe even technical, are they able to call the court and ask some of these questions? And has the court been able to sort of help them walk through these forms, which aren't really their forms, but have they been able to sort of assist in that way?
I think that probably the best circumstance has been for the court service centers. So those are not technically court employees, but there are 6 of these around the state, which is a great project. So they're not legal aid, but they're there to help people access the court and fill out forms. So they've used our forms and they're doing remote sessions like over Zoom with people. I know particularly like the domestic violence form that we have is one that they're using that way. I think that's the main way for that kind of assistance to be provided. We have the ability to have live chat. And the problem is just staffing one, right? So we need someone who'd be able to be at the other end and answering questions via live chat, which we haven't done yet.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's also good to note that these aren't just for kind of end users. One of our one profile for our end users are advocates who are also able to use these forms or to point people to these forms and help them to some degree so that it can speed the process for them or make it more clear, or if an advocate doesn't have as much experience with one form, these forms can provide more clarity on certain situations.
Yeah, a lot of the time someone might have, if you're an attorney or a social worker, you might have had your client come into your office to fill out one of these forms on paper, right? So we can replace a little bit of that workflow by having the client on the phone, the advocate in front of the computer, or over Zoom, potentially, if the client has that capability. And at the end, it's really critical that once the form is filled out, the client can add their signature without having to come in person. So that's been one of, Matt, actually, that's a good point. So one of the ways the courts adapt is to make their rules really clear about digital signatures so that those are permissible. Because there's some courts that were sticklers about wet signatures in the past. It was always a chance of a problem with the clerk, but it's very clear right now that that's not a problem.
Nice. I actually have maybe more of a technical question that I think some of our technical folks might be interested in, and that is, I know folks are using a lot of Python and docassemble, and I'm wondering if you can maybe share a bit about why you chose that technology and how easy or I guess challenging it's been for folks to pick that up and use it, and I don't know, maybe what's coming in the future of docassemble.
Yeah, so I think probably like I could have a second full-time job would be a docassemble evangelist might be. So that's part of why I chose it. It's a platform that I really like and I'm familiar with. And I really like the way that the project has been, the docassemble project has been working. For those who aren't familiar, it's the engine that powers our interactive forms essentially. So it helps you with that part of the process. So you have a YAML file, which is a relatively plain language readable format. And that is what you edit. And the docassemble engine runs and turns that into an interactive web app. So it's relatively accessible and easy to pick up. We have trained a number of students who had no coding background over the summer. So I think maybe the proof is in the pudding there that we've trained people who didn't know how to do it and now like are really proficient in our process. And we've tried to standardize. That helped a lot, I think, as well. And there were growing pains there, but we've come up with a way of making it much more drop-in ready.
And
in order to help people with that. I will also make it clear that none of the projects that we have today require you to do any docassemble or YAML editing. They're data projects for the most part, so we're asking people to help us improve data or to do straight Python coding, and we want to have like an API to be able to access it in the docassemble platform, but you don't need to know how that integrates. You just need to be able to create the API for us, potentially. Dara has a great question, so I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, I am from Olin. I'm part of an Olin team that is working on justice system reform. And I was wondering if you guys had talked about how you want to help people connect to these forms and make that process easier, but what if people are looking for connecting to attorneys or other advocates or other experts in the space that they need help? Have you thought about adding that as a feature at all?
It's a great question. So that's not a part of the problem that we're trying to solve, but some of our partners have done a lot of really great work in that area. So a project that I'm really familiar with, but I'm not part of, is the legal resource finder that Mass Legal Help and Massachusetts Law Reform Institute are working on. And they're actually a part of our project to, especially on the domestic violence forms that we're working on. They've been like a huge partner on that. So that's another project that they have, is helping people find the right resource and advocate. We're trying to zero in on just like the part that we know where we can help, and forms are something that I have a lot of experience in. And I knew we could do something to scale up the ability to automate these forms.
I also think it might be interesting to mention that part of what we're doing at not MassAccess, but the underlying project, the doc assembly line project is what we call it, is to create processes and conventions that might help other projects get their forms up and running more effectively, more quickly, and more robustly, with a set of pre-built tools and again, the processes. I cannot emphasize how important they have been to coordinate efforts in an effective way. So processes around volunteers, onboarding, educating, managing, testing, all these kinds of processes. Transforming PDFs and docx documents into the kind of foundation of the code that a coder will build off of when implementing it.
That's a really good point, and I'm happy to demonstrate that. I think probably this isn't the right time to do it, but yeah, the tooling that we built has been a huge part of the project, as Michelle said, and some of it's code and some of it is process that we've just written down. One of the resources I know it's going to be like super helpful is a style guide that we came up with that helps figure out how do you phrase these questions in a way that they're accessible and understandable to somebody. And because we have so many volunteers that have come in and students who come into the project to participate, it's been so important to write things down that kind of were in our head for some of the people who've been doing this work quite a lot, to make it something that is more actionable when you don't already have that experience. And I suspect that'll be a resource that other people can benefit from as well. I see a question from Daniel. So if you want, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask it out loud.
Sure. So I've just started to get into some coding myself. For somebody who's new, could you explain parsing HTML and how that relates to your project?
Yes, let me do a new share and I'll show you. Well, I don't want to go in too crazy, but let's see. Okay, so this is what Daniel's looking at, which is our project list, which is great. Thank you for jumping right into that. So we have this database here that is already, it's great. What we want to do is just integrate it. So when I put in a zip code and I click search, I'm going to see a list of resources for me as a domestic violence survivor that I can access. So we want to be able to take this information and embed it in two places. One, into the interview, so that when someone is going and using the form, and they're a survivor and they need help, instead of giving them this 1-800 number, we can give them the resource that helps serve their zip code. So we need to take this and embed it into our page in the right place. Obviously, we don't want to make them type in their zip code here on this web form and have it just live on its own web. We'd rather be able to take their zip code that they've already given us, send it to this web page and get back the results that we need and be able to format them in a way that makes sense. And then if I get to the end of this form, it gives me a 2-page cover sheet with instructions for how to deal with my next steps after it gets filed with the court. And that's obviously another place we'd want to have that. So if someone has completed their petition for a restraining order, they have a number that's a safe number that they can call to be able to get helped. So we're taking it and changing it one more time and reformatting it so it works in a printed document. And if this might be the right level of detail here, right? Like if we click and we look at the underlying HTML code for here, it's really nicely regularly formatted. So we're just going to take that, remove these tags like H3, BR, and convert those to the equivalent thing that would be needed to be formatted into a Microsoft Word document, essentially. So just run through this whole list, pull out all the, they even have them in nice individual divs, each called articles. We're going to pull those all out, put them into a list that we can manipulate more in a Word file or in Python.
And just to add to that, I think what we're talking about is not like copy and pasting and making our own database, because this database is being maintained and that's not something we have the manpower to do. So what we will be doing is writing a program that will, upon request, go fetch the information from this data and bring it back. So it has to parse it live. So it has to be able to do it repeatedly. We can't just get a bunch of volunteers to, copy down all the pieces of data that we're looking for.
That's a really good point. So as Michelle said, like this is one where we're integrating with an existing resource. The court database we're maintaining because the existing resource has a lot of flaws in it. And we want to add enough information that it's worth us maintaining it. This database of DV resources is already perfect. We just need a layer to integrate with it. And that's actually already written. We just need to add some refinement to it. And especially it's going to be reformatting the information that comes in like this so that it works for going into a Word document. That's mostly what we want to do.
A lot of the projects we're doing today, though, do not require that kind of technical knowledge, though. We have projects that just require research. We have other projects that do require technical knowledge, but you don't have to have, you don't have to be a technologist or a coder to participate in some of the other projects.
A number of them are going to just be, and hold on, let me see. Oh, I got to this from the page that I wanted to navigate back to. So a lot of them are literally, we know exactly the data we need, but we do need someone to copy and paste it into a spreadsheet in the right place, so then we can automatically generate it into the right format that we need. So very much the case that there are ways to help out that don't require any coding or any looking at HTML. Just going to a Google Sheet and putting the information in the right place.
Which is incredibly helpful. Just any amount of time that get that it's such a large undertaking that having volunteers on board to do that kind of work will really help people get to the finish line with the help they're looking for.
So, okay, I do want to remind people we have a channel for this on the Slack. So it's the access-to-justice channel. So if you want to join there, that's another way to participate. Definitely invite people to keep asking questions that they have. So one of the nice things about our project, I hope, is that we have a team of technical people that you can connect with, and we have the subject matter experts that you can connect with. So hopefully we're like a full one-stop shop for everybody who wants to participate in a project. And we're here for the long term. I'm at Suffolk. We're hoping to keep getting grant funding to keep the project expanding, but no matter what, it's integrated into our coursework. So it's going to be around, and there'll be a way for your project to see the light of day and continue. And as you saw some of the forms, each of the projects that we're talking about are going to enhance the existing forms and help it make it easier for us to make better new forms. I'm not seeing a lot more questions, but I don't know how we're going to transition from this to just working on stuff.
Yeah, so what folks can do is if if you found this interesting and want to help out, you should join. If you're not yet in the Slack, joining the Slack is slack.codeforboston.org. You enter your email and get an invitation, and then you'll want to join the Access to Justice channel. And then folks can start to engage in the Access to Justice channel. And maybe what would make sense is you can have an initial setup or initial Slack call for folks that just want to chat and figure out where they want to begin. And then, you can chat in Slack about sort of next steps for folks and what they want to do. And then if folks have questions as they go along, there'll be opportunity for them to pose those questions in Slack or set up more calls or that sort of thing.
Sounds perfect. So yeah, I'll see everybody on the Slack channel, and I'll put up a Zoom there that it can be used the whole day. And I think Michelle's going to be like a really key point of contact, but I'll also be around all afternoon and during the week and over the next month.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Quentin. I really appreciate this. This is such a cool project, and really excited to see this sort of partnership with the courts and all of this happening out of Suffolk, right here in Boston. So excited to see how this continues to grow, and hope folks will get involved and get some cool stuff done.
Thank you, Matt. So great to meet everybody, and I look forward to seeing you on our Slack channel.
Awesome.